from a mitigation standpoint, Ram, I'd love to hear from you. You've spoken about some of these things. However, I would love to hear from a developing secure generative AI systems. What are the best practices, methodologies that you're using with security and privacy in mind? Because you've been implementing this in a highly regulated environment. There's a lot of money at risk when it comes to what you're doing. Talk a little bit about what mitigation techniques you're using, especially as they relate to security and best practices.
Sure. I think there's a couple of factors we look at it. Like one is like when you look at the model itself, at the point I touched upon, like, are you going to use open source or closed source models? And if you have open source models, are you actually internally hosting versus like, are you sending any sort of data outside to open source models like, let's say, OpenAI? We've seen like a lot of open source models which are really powerful, and they are as good as like what you could really see is GPT-4. So in terms of the data that you're really dealing with, if you're doing sensitive data, confidential data, I think Shail pointed out about like having some data code going out. So in those cases, like we're really focusing on actually building those solutions in-house where the model is hosted inside your data center. So the data never really leaves your premises. That kind of gives like one set of another control. The other aspect we look at is around like data access control and data minimization in training the model. We need to really make sure that, okay, when we train the model, we don't necessarily overtrain with too much data. We need to train the model with the right set of data, what it really needs to know, right? It's always easy to say, well, let's dump everything in there and then let it answer it, right? We should not do that. We should really train what it really is supposed to know and build it. And then also, like we talked about the document scanning and sensitivity around, like, what data goes in and the RAG. The other element is also look at, like, from security aspect of it, like if you're building common APIs, which is going to talk to like different internal or external large language models, you want to really externalize it to your application. So you have a single interface that is really talking to all the different models. Let's say if you're talking to, let's say, Gemini and OpenAI, you have a common API, you can really build it. So that way you can really put all your guardrails in there, right? So you not really want to leave that to each individual application to do what is right, but rather you do it as an enterprise level and really build it right from one get-go. And the guardrails is super important for me when you look at like in the entire pipeline, whether it is like we talked about, like what prompt should be allowed. Okay, do you have a bias in hallucination? In terms of like, what comes out of the models, how do you really detect that? Toxicity, like whether it is even like the prompt the user is putting versus what is actually coming out from the model. So you need to have those guardrails that is in place, whether it is going into the model, going out from data into the model, and also like what is coming out of the large language model. Like in every places you want to have. And ideally what you should also do here is like we should also put all the regulation that you're supposed to comply with, and you actually add that part of the guardrails and build validations around it. And explainability is a super important aspect of this model, right? Because how do you really prove that your model is actually producing the right outcome? Right? That's a super important, both from your internal customer standpoint, external customer standpoint, and regulator standpoints. You need to see that, right? So using tools like explainability AI, where you can really see, okay, what is the context the model got before it really gave the output. So, can build that. And you need to make sure it's all like in an auditable format, right? So you can actually constantly do the human in the loop on validation of what the model gave. Is it really gave the right input? Like you can really go back into internal controls, external controls, you can really go and, do that. And the other aspect, two aspects I would just point out is like, which is probably non-attractive, but it is super important, is like you need to really focus on automating your entire process from model deployment to your vector store backups and everything. I've seen so many cases people don't focus on that, and then like something got crashed, and then you have to continually do it, right? So this is super important looking at it. And last but not least, like is your user training, right? Like train your users internally and externally. Like, this is not like, gonna solve everything, right? It's gonna solve what you fed as a data rather than like, it's not gonna solve like a world hunger, like by asking questions. So these are the factors we look at it.